You know this image. It's probably one of the most famous images in the history of science. It's an idea that's so deep in our culture, we barely even notice it anymore. And in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and show you why it is completely, fundamentally wrong.
Yep, that's right. That iconic image of evolution, the one you've seen on t-shirts, coffee mugs, everywhere. Well, it's feeding you a story. A story that has way less to do with actual biology and a whole lot more to do with politics.
I want you to just picture it in your head right now. You know exactly the one I'm talking about, right? On the far left, you've got a crouching, knuckle-dragging ape. And then it slowly stands up, a bit more upright here, maybe a Neanderthal there, until finally, on the far right, standing tall and proud, us, modern humans. They call it the March of Progress.
And that, right there, is the heart of the whole thing. See, this idea of evolution as a straight line, a climb from lower to higher beings, that's not really a scientific fact. It's a cultural metaphor, and it was born in a very, very specific time and place.
Okay, so let's get into this. To really understand where this whole ladder idea came from, we've got to travel back in time. Back to when Darwin's theory first exploded onto the scene in mid-19th century Victorian England.
So you got to understand, this wasn't some calm, thoughtful society. This was the absolute peak of the Industrial Revolution. The British Empire was sprawling across the globe. And back home, society was intensely, rigidly hierarchical, obsessed with class, rank, and climbing that social ladder. The whole story was, if you're not climbing, you're falling behind.
And here is the absolute crucial distinction you have to get. What Darwin actually described was a biological mechanism. Pretty simple, really. Some organisms have traits that just happen to make them better at surviving and reproducing in a specific environment. That's it. But that's not what the Victorian culture heard, not at all. They heard a story that sounded just like their own lives, a brutal, all-out struggle for dominance, where only the best and strongest make it to the top.
Which brings us to probably the most misunderstood phrase in all of biology: survival of the fittest. It's like the official bumper sticker for evolution, right? But here's the thing. Darwin never even came up with it. It was coined by a philosopher named Herbert Spencer, who is a massive cheerleader for laissez-faire capitalism.
So what's the point? Spencer's catchy little phrase turned biology into an excuse. It created this really dangerous cycle. You take your cultural belief, in this case, ruthless competition, you project it onto nature, and then you turn around and use that natural law to justify your own culture. It let people say that things like social inequality, poverty, colonialism, well, they weren't just sad facts of life. No, they were natural.
Okay, so if evolution isn't a ladder, then what in the world is it? Well, modern biology gives us a very different, and if you ask me, a much more fascinating picture. Instead of a single, tidy ladder, I want you to think of a huge, sprawling, branching bush, or maybe a chaotic river delta with water flowing in every direction. There is no single up direction. Life just branches out. It diversifies to adapt to all these different environments, specializing in different little niches. It's not about becoming higher, it's about finding your lane and thriving in it.
And here's the trap. It's so intuitive, we all fall for it. We assume that because we humans are so complex, we build spaceships, we write symphonies, that we must be the most evolved, the pinnacle of it all. But is that really how biology sees it?
Okay, let's talk about bacteria for a second. They are unbelievably ancient and incredibly simple. And yet, you could easily argue they are the most successful life form on this planet. They've conquered almost every environment imaginable, from deep-sea volcanic vents to the inside of your own gut. In the great game of survival, just sticking around, simplicity and adaptability are often the winning hand.
So a much better way to think about evolution is this. It's a constant process of adaptation. It's not about getting better, it's about fitting in. It's not a climb to the top, it's more like a series of sideways shuffles to just stay in the game while the rules are constantly changing around you.
And here's where that old Victorian story really starts to crumble. Their whole model was obsessed with competition. But since their time, scientists have shown over and over that cooperation is just as powerful a force in nature, maybe even more so.
You can actually see how the idea itself evolved. First, you had that nature red in tooth and claw Victorian view. But then you get naturalists like Peter Kropotkin. He studied life in the brutal, freezing cold of Siberia, and you know what he saw? He saw that the animals that fought each other all the time, they died. The ones that worked together,
The ones that huddled for warmth or hunted in packs, those were the ones that made it.
And the real mind-blower is Lynn Margulis's revolutionary theory. She looked at the kind of complex cells that make you and me and all animals, and she noticed that the tiny power generators inside them, the mitochondria, they look an awful lot like ancient bacteria. Her theory, which is now just accepted science, is that one of the biggest leaps forward in the history of life didn't happen because of a fight. It happened because of a merger. One simple cell basically swallowed another one, and instead of digesting it, they just became permanent partners.
So, the science has moved on. It's pretty clear. The ladder is gone, it's been replaced. And that change in thinking, that paradigm shift, it has some really profound implications for how we see ourselves and our place in the world.
This shift, from a ladder to a web, it changes everything. The ladder view is rigid, it's hierarchical, and it puts humanity sitting right at the top, like the CEO of planet Earth. But in the web view, there is no top. We're not the CEOs, we're just one node in a vast, tangled, interconnected network, and we are deeply, deeply dependent on all the other nodes.
Now that is a profoundly humbling thought, for sure. But you know what? It can also be incredibly relieving. It means you don't have to win at evolution. You don't have to be constantly climbing and competing. You just have to adapt, to connect, to navigate. And sometimes the best way to do that is to cooperate, or even just to simplify.
But hang on, before we wrap this up, there is one last twist. It's really easy for us to look back and criticize the Victorians for plastering their industrial, competitive worldview all over biology. But we have to ask ourselves, are we any different? Every single generation thinks it's the first one to see the world clearly, without any biases. But the truth is, we are always looking through our own cultural glasses. So, what are ours?
I mean, just listen to the language we use. We talk about the brain as a computer, right? With neural circuits. We describe our DNA as software or genetic code that can be edited or hacked. We even talk about nature in corporate speak, describing ecosystem services.
And that kind of leaves us with this final question to chew on. Is the human brain really a computer? Or is a computer just the most complicated and impressive machine we happen to have right now? The challenge for us then is to try and see the web, not the ladder, and to always remember that our favorite metaphors might just be our own modern culture wearing a lab coat.